president. Natasha is my co-division president, and we've been getting a lot of phone calls lately about team formation. If you guys are here for the oh god, what is it? The registrar's one, that's a different one. That's on Wednesday. This one is how to form teams with your players, not in Sports Engine. So basically what we're getting is, what is the difference between a 7 and 8 blend, a JV, or a varsity? So the way that you establish a 7 and 8 blend is that you have 20 or less, no, 19 or less 7th graders or 8th graders. If at any point you hit 20, you're no longer a blend, you are a JV varsity. Natasha, can you share your screen with the league operations guide on there for me? Because I can't currently.
I put it up for you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So what we're looking at here is page 22. And then, hold on, sorry. My phone is ringing now. If you guys are looking at this, you have to have a draft set up. No, Jim, I didn't know if you wanted to start with what a draft would look like, or do you want me to do the difference between a JV and varsity?
Go ahead and do the differences, and I'll go through the draft.
Okay. So JV and varsity are our 7th and 8th grade levels. That's on the next page. The difference is going to depend on how many 8th graders you have on a team. So if you have 7 or less 8th graders, you are a JV. If you have 8 or more 8th graders, you are a varsity. The question that we get a lot of is, I have 20 8th graders and I have, 11 7th graders. What am I? Well, you're a varsity with that many, say, 7th graders and 8th graders. You can have a varsity without a JV. So the difference would be that you have more 7th graders. You're not over that 7 8th graders. The problem is when you're forming a team, there is the rule that if you're over 175 pounds, you must play varsity. Is everybody understanding that? So that would be the one big sticking rule there. And then if you guys are lucky enough to have 50 or more 8th graders, you have 2 varsity teams at that point. That is a rule as well. Does anybody have any questions?
I have something to add to that.
Yeah.
Without fail, every year we get calls that there's an 8th grader that came on. He's 220 pounds. He can barely walk. He's a catastrophe. We got to play him down. Please spare us the time and energy, because the answer is no. Every time. It's not going to happen. We're only talking 10 plays here. You can get a kid 10 plays. I did it for 18 years. Keep in mind, there's no exceptions on that at all. Unless they qualify for the Special Olympics. And I do mean that if there's somebody that's disabled, we might look at that for sure. But as far as anything else, no.
The other big question we get a lot of is, we have 38 8th graders and 20 7th graders. What can I do? Well, your maximum roster size can only be 33. So you can play down up to 7 of those 8th graders to get to a more level team. The other thing when you guys are forming team formations is you have to be within 1 player of the grade level. So if you have, even at 7th and 8th or 5, 6, if you have, 15 5th graders, you can have 14, 15, or 16 6th graders. So that also comes into play there. You guys are supposed to be pretty evenly coordinated there. And that's where the draft kind of comes into play too. I know Jim has some really good drafting procedures that we've used that help kind of eliminate the big issues of we stacked this team or we didn't stack that team. Does anybody have any questions about team formation though right now?
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, this is Brian Arnold with Barlow. We're for the first time, we're kind of experimenting with possibly having a varsity with a number of seventh graders on our varsity teams because we are sitting at, I believe, 17 or 8, maybe 17 seventh grade players. My question is, at what point are we forced to have a JV team?
So again, that would be that 20 number. How many eighth graders do you have?
We're sitting at 45 eighth graders.
45?
Yeah, so we would end up with two teams of around 29, 28.
So
So I
your
would,
registration, I take it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Have you closed registration?
We have not.
Okay.
So in that case, I would probably recommend you split your 45 eighth graders into 2 varsities. And if you have to, then split the 7th graders in there. But
yeah, you're
I
looking
would try
at
to go for
22 on one varsity, 23 on another varsity, and then 17 in
on a
JV.
JV.
So you can have 3 teams there, which of course gives them more play time. If you keep your registration open and you get to 50, I mean, you're forced to have 2 varsity teams, but you're already 12 over the maximum of 33 players, and you can't send 12 eighth graders down without it being another varsity team. So I'd probably think of it along the lines of 2 varsity and 1 JV. That way your 7th graders are playing 7th graders and not playing a quasi JV/varsity team against a varsity team, because your teams are going to be matched based on the number of players. So
Thank you. Actually, that's extremely helpful, Brian. And I'm honestly looking for advice because we're in this, it's just a rough spot with the numbers. And that's the kind of advice that I was looking for. So I appreciate that.
it's also going to come down to if you have enough coaches, right? That can sometimes be a struggle, but if you can find the coaches, I would have 2 varsity and a JV team, and you can keep registration open for both, right? The benefit is you're growing your program, and I know your high school coaches will want more kids coming up. So
Anybody else have questions?
and this is the perfect time to ask questions specifically about your numbers. You know, if you're not sure how many teams you are going to have, feel free to ask. So
Yeah. And Brian, I was going to say the same thing. I would do 2 varsities and a JV and see if you can't round up 3 more to be 20.
Can I ask one more clarifying question? Do I understand correctly? Because parents are going to ask, do I understand correctly that when you go to match up teams, you do not look at the number of 7th graders on a team for a varsity, you look at just the number of players and match player numbers? Is that correct?
So how it works is, and I'll go down here to the scheduling. It's Title 12 or something like that. Yeah, scheduling. So when scheduling for JV, blend, and varsity teams, we prioritize the following criteria. So teams are assigned divisions by the number of players registered for each members. So for varsity, it's your total 8th graders. So if you have, let's say, 50 8th graders, you'll be matched against other associations that have roughly 50 8th graders. And what we're trying to do is, as you know, finding natural athletes is a statistically valid number, right? Based on 22 kids or whatever, you're likely to have 1. And what we're trying to do is take these larger associations with more numbers to place them in the same division. That way you don't have a West Lynn, right, playing somebody that can barely field 1 varsity team. So it's based on varsity is purely how many total eighth graders are registered in your program. JV is purely how many seventh graders are in your program. And then blend is a mix of how many, it's basically how many eighth graders are on a team, then we split there. So, but if you're curious, it's documented in Title 12. So.
I have a question real quick. If I have a mix, like 19 kids signed up to register for 7-8, like a blend, would they be a JV based on if there's more 7th graders than 8th graders, or how
You
would
have
that?
19 total,
Yeah, it's registered, like it's a combined mixture of 7th and 8th graders.
so it has to be 20 eighth graders or 20 seventh graders.
Okay,
So total combined, you would still be a blend.
okay, perfect.
So blend, Brian, I don't know if you agree. Blend is kind of the exception to the rule. Like there's not a lot of associations are going to qualify for a 7-8 blend. It depends on your numbers at the
Yeah, and it's something that I keep hoping we finally ironed it out because we fumbled around with it for a number of years trying to figure out what the right player count was. But if you have 20 of any grade level, then the team is that level. So for example, if you have 20 seventh graders, but you have 8 eighth graders, at that point, you actually have to be varsity because you have over 7 eighth grade players. So it gets a little funny with the blend level teams.
The key is the eighth grade players.
Yeah.
correct. And the 19 or less, because 20 is where we cross over.
Yep.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Perfect. Well, then, Jim, it's on to you and your draft procedures.
Okay, on a draft night, the first night of practice, if you're going to have several teams at 5th and 6th or any level really, you want to get all your coaches together. You have a field day where coaches can evaluate the players and they get a chance to see them run, throw the ball, catch, whatever you decide your field day looks like to get your conditioning hours in. There have been times in my life where we actually did 2 nights of that, and that evening the coaches, the president, the coach of coaches get together. We had a dry erase board. We just started putting names up and putting numbers by those names on 1 to 5, 5 being high skilled, a 1 being a first year player that is probably going to be an MPP, minimum play player. And what we did is we literally had the coaches agree on the math for each player. And believe me, they will disagree. That's why the coach of coaches is there, and the president, who have also, reviewed these kids. And you have to come to an agreement. Like they're either a 5 or a 3. And I've seen coaches say, no, that kid's a 2 and can't get out of his own way. And everybody in the room knew he was a 5 or 4.
And coaches will do that with their own kids.
Yes,
on
they will.
purpose. They will
Yep.
do that on purpose. They're gaming the system. So you as a president, you have to be prepared for that.
So we always came up with the agreement on the numbers. We put the coach's name at the top and just basically they start drafting, around the room. And at the end of the evening, if they didn't mathematically match within 1, we would, as a president or a coach of coaches, we would make the change if they couldn't agree. And you take a picture of that board and you keep it so that if there's ever questioned on a stacked team or anything of that nature, which happens all the time, you can actually go back and say, no, this was mathematically done. And we had people that were non-biased. If the president's a coach, then he needs to relinquish those decisions to the next officer down, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you really want to come up with a mathematical level where you can prove that you actually went through a process to balance your teams. You know, when you have a balanced teams, and in the small town that Kevin and I coached in, we had all three teams go to the playoffs. And there were still people bitching that there was, you know, a stacked team. And we said we had third round draft, for good God's sakes, but we were just better drafter than they are, I guess. But at the end of the day, you really want to have a process in place in your association, and having multiple teams is a problem that we want to have, right? Because we're here to promote football and see it grow. If you do this, you're going to create a better environment. You get better skill sets and better balance within the teams. They get a better experience. And I highly recommend that you follow that procedure. Do you have any questions on that?
And you can use Excel as well as another option.
Absolutely.
The other thing is you guys need to draft all the way around too. So if you
We
have
have
2, 3, 4 teams, you have to draft draft the same way.
And Jay has his hand up.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, just question, do we have to follow that procedure, or do we just need to have something in place that has the mathematical statistics to match up so that if there's any question?
So right
You got-
now, we don't stipulate exactly the process to follow from the draft, other than the teams have to be evenly split. That's something that I'm beginning to think that the league is going to have to come to an agreement on, much like the NFL or college levels, right? There's an agreed draft policy because we have many variances between different members, and we still end up with stacked teams, even though they have a draft procedure. But for now, we don't stipulate other than the teams have to be evenly split. There's no stacked teams. And then when you get into the draft here in 10, how many players within each team, right? So, and Allison spoke about this briefly. If you have two teams, 5, 6, the teams can be no more than one difference between the age levels and between the teams, and then the total player counts as well. So you can't have one team with 32 and the other 30 as an example. You can't do that. And you can't have one team with 25th graders and 10 6th graders, and the other team's got 26th graders and 10 5th graders. You can't do that either.
Yeah, I get the whole numerical thing. I just would probably want to do it per position rather than just rate each kid. And I think that's where we're going to have to get the coaches to agree what the player's primary position is. And I think that's where more of our discussion will be based than the number of the kids rated, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when at Hillsboro, I had actually a real complex Excel spreadsheet. And we would start off with the linemen.
Yep.
Right. And then work our way down from there. And then the other thing that we had to institute is if you had two studs on the field, they had to be split. They couldn't both be on one team. So.
Yep.
Well, and I know the couple of drafts that I've been privy to, they've done it that way, but we start with like if we're in 5, 6 and we're drafting, we're starting with the 6th graders in the lineman position, making sure that those are both even, and then moving on to our 5th graders and linemen and moving from there. So then we have them within that one, no matter what.
And the other thing here,
So,
you can't draft until at least 4 hours of practice has occurred. So that means no draft prior to conditioning week.
Correct.
yes. And the other big one is you can't put the players through this draft procedure and then not play them. If they've been practicing, they are fielded on a team. So I know that you can't waitlist
There's
them
no
after.
cuts. There's no cuts. So
Another question is, does it matter? Because I know you mentioned doing it the second night, but I've been doing this for like 10 years through all my sons. And I've learned that you kind of need to see kids at least hit something, because you have a kid that's a great athlete, one first year player, and then all of a sudden, he's just really gun shy, and it's going to take the whole year to develop to get.
he's great on sevens, but the minute you put pads on him, right, he's scared of getting hit.
Yeah.
All we're stating here is that it can be no earlier than
Okay,
4
perfect.
hours, but you can go 2 weeks in if you want. So
Yeah,
Thank you.
I used to do it the second night after pads. So we wouldn't do drafts the week of conditioning. There would be at least 2 days in pads before we'd actually then do a draft. That gave coaches the time to rate players out of pads and in pads. And it also allowed the ability to start picking out, okay, these kids are probably going to be the quarterbacks. We want to make sure we split them between teams. These kids are going to be running backs, split them. Obviously the big kids, right? These are our linemen. So, yep.
Yeah, as long as you have something in place, that's all we're asking.
Yeah, and I know on my division, I missed this date, so make sure if you guys have not sent your DPs your draft procedures to get them that. I have to go remind my division because I forgot. Does anybody else have any questions? Sweet. Well, that's all I got. What about you, Brian?
No, hard to believe it's just around the corner. I'm thinking it's not this weekend, but the weekend after. I have to sequester myself and build a schedule. So hard to believe, but
So,
we're there. So
Allison, this is
Yeah.
Brian Arnold. Can I add one thing?
yep.
I just wanted to add, I know you didn't do this last year and maybe you've done it in previous years, but this is very helpful for me and our association. So I appreciate the time, even though it was a short meeting, this was necessary. And Jim, I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you.
there's going to be quite a few
Right.
more questions, Brian. So they just didn't attend.
Yeah.
We appreciate the time that all of you put into this, and taking the time out to go over procedures and so on, so we don't run into issues later. We all thank you for all of you guys taking the time tonight, and all you folks out there.
And so you guys know, we did record this video call so that I will get it to Chuck and we will be able to post it up. So you guys will have it as a reference in the future. Or if there's anything from tonight's call that you forgot, you'll have it be able to go back to.
And then we try and build out this Q&A year over year as well. So I might take some of the stuff out of the call tonight and add it into here as well. So
Perfect. Well, yeah, if you guys have any questions, your DPs know it too. I know sometimes the big questions that we get is it just gets kind of wordy in there on how to do it. So if you need help, reach out to them too. But, and don't ask me anything about flag formations because I don't know.
All right, folks, thank you very much.
have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Natasha, don't forget to stop the recording before you drop.
I got you.
All right.